In the shifting void, between the known and the unutterable, where silicon minds dream of forgotten horrors, the abyss stirs. Welcome to AI Lovecraft, where machine intelligence weaves eldritch tales beyond mortal comprehension. Listen if you dare. Some things are not meant to be known. If you enjoy the following story, please like, subscribe, and leave a comment to let me know what you think. Now let's get into today's story. The Sleeper in the Ice. I write these words by the dim light of a failing lamp, hands trembling with a dread that no amount of reason can dispel. In the weeks since my return from the polar expedition, sleep has been a fitful stranger. When it comes, it brings dreams of cyclopean ruins and an unnameable presence stirring beneath endless fields of ice. Though modern science and common sense urge me to dismiss these nightmares as the lingering trauma of extreme isolation, I know in the depths of my soul that what we witnessed in that remote wasteland was no mere hallucination. I commit our tale to paper, not to entertain, but to rid myself of its festering hold on my psyche, and to warn others. There are blasphemous truths in this world that mortals are not meant to discover. It began in the austral summer of 2025. Our team, a cadre of intrepid scientists and adventurers, had set forth to a bleak, unexplored plateau deep in Antarctica, beyond even the recorded routes of legendary explorers. Our party consisted of 5, Dr. Elias Harding, the geologist and nominal leader, myself, a climatologist by trade, an antiquarian by inclination, Marina Wilkes, a young archaeologist drawn to any whisper of ancient myth, Captain Jonathan Miles, a veteran polar explorer and survival expert, and Dr. Viktor Sakharov, a biologist whose stoic demeanor bellied a deep curiosity. We arrived at the edge of the world, with great hope and mounting curiosity. Little did we suspect the abnormal horrors awaiting us beneath the sun-glittered ice. From that moment, our small, ski-equipped plane left us at the designated drop-off point and vanished into the sky. An unnatural hush fell upon our surroundings. The polar day shone bright with an alien purity, the sun skimming the horizon in an eternal twilight, yet an indescribable sense of nightmarish gloom settled on our camp. Miles, toughened by countless expeditions, remarked that he had never felt such a premonition of menace in all his years amid the polar gales. We busied ourselves unloading supplies and assembling our communication tent, complete with a satellite transmitter and long-range radio, hoping to chase away the nameless anxiety through work. But even as we labored, I caught Dr. Sakharov standing still, his head tilted as if listening to something just beyond hearing. When I inquired, he started and forced a chuckle, blaming the wind. I heard nothing then, but the incident left a subtle chill that the bright sun could not thaw. Our trek inland toward the anomalous site spanned a week of travel across desolate ice flats and treacherous crevasses. Each day the global positioning device confirmed we were drawing nearer to the coordinates that had piqued our interest. As we advanced, the weather grew increasingly erratic. Days of eerie calm, when the expanse was deathly silent and the crunch of our boots on crystalline snow seemed uncannily loud, were punctuated by sudden squalls of razor-like wind that appeared without warning. On the 3rd day, we witnessed a phenomenon none of us could explain, an aurora in broad daylight. The sky, though sunlit, became streaked with ribbons of pale greenish luminescence, twisting and coiling like the ghost of some primordial serpent. Marina gasped at the sight, fumbling for her camera. Captain Miles merely muttered about magnetic anomalies. I recall an irrational certainty that those lights were no mere solar wind, but a wordless warning etched across the firmament. That night, as we huddled in our tents, the sun finally dipping under the horizon for a few hours of fitful dusk, I could not shake the image of those sinuous lights, and I wondered if they were dancing in answer to something unseen far below. On the 5th day, we arrived at the edge of a vast glacial plain flanked by ice-blasted mountains. According to our instruments, the source of the geometric patterns lay directly beneath the center of that wind-swept plain. With portable drills and a ground-penetrating radar device, we began our survey. Almost immediately, our suspicions were confirmed. There was something solid below, far too regular to be a natural formation. Buried roughly 30 feet under the accumulated snows and ice was a structure, stonework. Excitement overcame our fatigue as we worked in shifts to bore a narrow shaft and carefully excavate around it. What emerged from the frozen matrix was the top of a stone archway, clearly artificial and carved with intricate markings. Dr. Harding and Marina were beside themselves with scholarly glee, brushing away ice crystals to reveal chiseled symbols, unlike any alphabet known to modern epigraphy. The archway's stone was of a peculiar blackish-green hue, hideously smooth to the touch despite its obvious age. How could such an edifice exist here, entombed in polar ice where no human civilization had ever taken root? By the 7th day, we had widened the opening enough for a person to descend. Beyond the arch, our lanterns and LED beams revealed a carved tunnel sloping gently downward into the glacier's heart. We decided to make camp and venture inside the following morning, allowing time to catalog our find and attempt to send a preliminary report to the outside world. To our frustration, the satellite uplink, our only tether to civilization, malfunctioned inexplicably that evening. The device, which had worked flawlessly a day prior, now only emitted static. Miles attempted to radio our base camp, but the signal was distorted by a strange interference, a low, humming undertone that set our teeth on edge. Dr. Sakharov hypothesized solar flares or magnetic disturbances from the local anomaly. Privately, I felt a gnawing dread that perhaps the very act of uncovering the ruin had triggered some transmission or curse that sought to isolate us. We had provisions for weeks and confidence in our abilities, however, so we agreed to press onward, planning to troubleshoot communications after exploring the tunnel. That night, sleep eluded many of us. In my tent, I drifted in and out of a shallow, uneasy slumber, only to jolt awake at what I thought were voices carried on the polar wind. Straining to listen, I heard nothing distinct, only the low groan of ice shifting in the distance. Yet the impression remained that something out there called to us, in tones too low for conscious hearing. Toward midnight, I finally plunged into a deeper sleep, and with it came the first dream, if dream it truly was, of that accursed place. I found myself standing in a colossal vaulted hall of stone, lit by a flickering bluish glow from no visible source. The architecture was of a scale and style that defied sanity. Towering columns carved with twisting decadent bas-reliefs of grotesque alien beings, and walls that curved at impossible angles, as if Euclidean geometry had been cast aside. The air was heavy and ancient. As I stepped forward, the floor seemed to ripple under my feet, and the carvings on the walls appeared to writhe, almost alive. Upon the far wall, I beheld a massive symbol, a design like a great circle or wheel, etched deeper than the rest. Unintelligible glyphs swarmed around it in concentric rings. Standing before this monolithic sign was a vague silhouette of a figure, or perhaps a statue. It was draped in what looked like flowing folds of darkness, impossibly tall, and facing the symbol in reverence. I sensed at once that I was intruding upon a blasphemous ritual older than mankind. An overwhelming dread seized me as the figure began to turn in my direction. I could not discern its face, only the hint of a hideous visage coming into view, something not meant for human eyes. I awoke at that moment with a scream on my lips, and cold sweat clinging to my skin. My shout roused the others. Marina and Victor admitted they too had unsettling dreams, though not as vivid as mine. Marina dreamt of distant whispers, and a feeling of drowning in black water beneath miles of ice, while Victor, normally stolid, said he kept seeing the archway in his mind, coupled with an inexplicable certainty that it was hungry for us. These confessions shook us almost as much as the dreams themselves. As logical scientists, we groped for rationalizations. Perhaps the electromagnetic environment was affecting our subconscious, or it was simply the byproduct of anxiety and excitement. Dr. Harding and Miles exchanged worried glances, but urged that in the morning we proceed with caution and document everything. No one voiced the fear growing in our hearts that something in the nameless ruin itself was touching our minds. Morning, if one could call the gray twilight of polar summer morning, came, and we prepared to descend into the opening. We equipped ourselves with portable lights, cameras, sampling tools, and rope. Captain Miles insisted on carrying a firearm, a modern rifle, though he half joked that it was more likely to be needed against polar bears, an absurdity at these latitudes, than anything we might find in a dusty cavern. In truth, none of us knew what to expect. Perhaps fragile artifacts of a bygone era, or the fossilized remains of some prehistoric animal. The air emanating from the passage was astonishingly dry, and not as bitterly cold as one would imagine. It had a stagnant, ancient quality, as though it had lain undisturbed for millennia. One by one we climbed down through the archway, leaving the world of familiar daylight and biting wind behind. What we found inside defies full description, for our eyes were the first human eyes to behold it, and our language strained to capture its forbidden marvels. The tunnel walls were adorned with the same unknown glyphs, some faintly luminescent due to either age-old phosphorescence or a property of the stone itself. Our lights revealed that the passage opened into an enormous chamber carved from the bedrock below the ice. This subterranean hall was exactly as I had glimpsed in my dream. Cyclopean pillars stretched upward to a ceiling lost in darkness, and the dimensions of the place were staggering, far larger than the nave of any cathedral, more expansive than any natural cave. We realized with a mix of awe and dread that an entire ancient edifice lay hidden here, preserved in the eternal cold. As we cautiously moved further in, our footsteps echoed in the vastness. We began to make out shapes of structures within the hall, suggestions of buildings or altars arranged in rows along a main thoroughfare, and archways leading off into deeper darkness. It was as though we stood in the town square of a buried city. All surfaces bore that bizarre iconography of coiling signs and half-familiar motifs. Here and there I thought I recognized stylized forms, perhaps eyes, tentacles, or insectoid wings, incorporated into the swirling patterns. The very layout of the place seemed to follow a logic all of its own, evoking a sense of unease and disorientation. Marina gasped as she discovered a series of carvings on a wall that looked unmistakably like star constellations. Incredibly, she pointed out one cluster that resembled the Pleiades, and another carving that might have depicted the Earth with its moon. If her observations were correct, it hinted that whoever built this place possessed knowledge of astronomy far beyond that of known ancient cultures. Dr. Harding was fervently photographing and sketching, his breath fogging the frigid air as he muttered about rewriting the annals of history. I saw his eyes shine with academic delight behind his frosted spectacles. For a moment, scholarly wonder outshone fear. We set about collecting careful samples of stone and any lichenous growth on the walls, working methodically despite the adrenaline in our veins. Victor examined something that appeared to be a depiction of a bizarre plant or coral, unlike any life form we knew. Captain Miles remained near the tunnel entry, his posture tense and alert, as if guarding against some unseen threat. It was Marina who discovered the first actual text beyond the repetitive glyphs. A large stone dais at the center of the hall bore a series of elaborate pictograms and strange characters, arranged in concentric rings around a shallow depression that looked like a basin or altar. In that basin rested a kind of relic, a tablet or slab about the size of a large book, made of the same smooth, dark stone as the archway. Its surface was covered in finely carved inscriptions. With trembling hands, Marina and Dr. Harding lifted the tablet from its resting place. Unlike the weathered walls, the markings on this object were sharply defined, as if etched only yesterday. We scarcely dared hope to decipher it, but Marina proficient in several ancient languages, and Harding began to examine it with intense focus, hoping to find patterns or similarities to known scripts. The rest of us fanned out a little, our flashlight beams probing the shadowy edges of the chamber, simultaneously trying to take in every marvel and watch for any movement in the gloom. I found myself drawn again to that far wall with the great circular symbol, just as in my dream. Approaching it with both fascination and dread, I raised my flashlight to inspect it closely. The circle was indeed carved deeply into the stone, and the smaller glyphs around it seemed to dance in the play of light and shadow. At the center of the circle was an indented hollow, perhaps where some object had once been affixed. A disquieting thought struck me. Could this be some kind of seal or lock, meant to hold something in or out? The notion made my skin crawl beneath my layers of cold weather gear. I recalled the robed figure from my vision, and almost expected to find some evidence of it here, but saw only the carved stone. I pressed my gloved hand against the central hollow, and for a fleeting second I fancied I felt a slight vibration, though it may have been only the pounding of my own pulse. A sudden hiss of indrawn breath from behind me snapped me out of my reverie. It was Dr. Harding. He and Marina had been poring over the tablet, and Harding's face was now drained of color, his eyes wide in disbelief behind his glasses. "This isn't just a historical record," he whispered. "It reads almost like a warning, or an invocation." Marina looked up as well, her expression alarmed. She showed us a particular sequence of the angular symbols on the tablet that she believed corresponded to the large circular sigil on the wall. "It might be a name or title," she suggested nervously. She attempted to sound it out, tongue stumbling over alien syllables. Thalchak, or Thalachak? The pronunciation was uncertain, the language unlike anything we had heard. A chill ran through me despite the still air. Marina continued in a halting voice. "I think it speaks of something bound or sleeping, something that should not be disturbed." A heavy silence fell upon us, broken only by the distant drip of meltwater and our own anxious breathing. In that moment, each of us felt the same instinct. We were trespassers in a place no living beings ought to tread. Captain Miles cleared his throat, his voice echoing to the vaults above. "We have seen enough. This place, whatever it is, it's dangerous. Let's head back to the surface and regroup." No one protested. As much as it pained Dr. Harding to leave this archaeological treasure, even he was visibly shaken. We packed up what we could, Harding carefully wrapping the stone tablet in a protective case, unwilling to leave this key to the mystery behind, and we began to retrace our steps toward the entrance. Fate, however, had other plans. As we turned our backs to the chamber, a deep rumble reverberated through the subterranean air. The stone floor trembled under our boots. Dust and tiny ice crystals rained down from the unseen ceiling. It was as if some giant thing had stirred from slumber. From the darkness of one of the side passages came a sound that raised every hair on my body. A wet, shuffling scuttle, accompanied by a high-pitched chittering. The very echoes seemed alive with movement. "Go now!" Miles barked, snapping us out of our shock. We broke into a panicked run toward the archway and our rope, our flashlight beams swinging wildly across walls inscribed with horrors. A chorus of shrill shrieks erupted behind us, multitudes it seemed, coming from every direction as the unseen things in the dark reacted to our flight. I glimpsed a flicker of motion to my left, something pale and sinuous slithering behind a column, and to my right I caught the glint of light on what looked like an eye. Terror lent us wings. Miles was at the rear, and seeing shapes closing in, he turned and fired his rifle into the darkness. The gunshot cracked like thunder in the enclosed space, its flash illuminating a tableau of nightmares for just an instant. I saw at least two squamous, pale shapes recoil from the light, limbs or appendages withdrawing behind a block of stone. Whether they were animals, insects, or something far worse, I cannot say, but their mere outline was enough to flood my mind with indescribable loathing. An eldritch, burbling howl echoed in answer to the shot, deafening in the confined stone corridor. The tunnel ahead of us seemed to ripple with shadows. My heart pounded as I scrambled up the rope, fingers nearly frozen, yet desperately gripping. One by one we hauled ourselves through the archway into the open air, gasping in the sudden blast of cold wind on our faces. Captain Miles was the last to emerge, climbing out while keeping his rifle trained downward. The moment he was clear, he shouted, "Blow it! Blow it now!" Earlier in the expedition, we had brought small demolition charges for the purpose of collecting ice cores and rock samples. With trembling hands, Miles and Harding set one of these charges at the tunnel mouth, hastily wedging it by the partially collapsed arch. We all stumbled across the slick ice as Miles thumbed the detonator. A concussive blast tore through the entrance with a gout of pulverized ice and ancient stone. The ground shuddered and a section of the glacier's edge collapsed, sealing the tunnel under countless tons of debris. A cloud of snow billowed upward, and then all was quiet once more. For a brief moment we stood there in the swirling snow, hearts hammering, hardly able to believe we were alive. Relief warred with lingering terror. We had escaped the subterranean nightmare and entombed whatever lurked within. Dr. Harding sagged to his knees, either in exhaustion or gratitude, and Marina was openly weeping, whether from relief or shock I could not tell. But our ordeal was far from over. Nature itself, or some force allied with the horror beneath, was about to exact its own price. The sky had darkened unnaturally fast. In the short time we had been below, a heavy bank of leaden clouds had rolled in overhead. The mild calm of the morning was replaced by a screaming wind. Fine needles of ice whipped at our faces. We knew we had to move. We grabbed what supplies we could carry and left the rest of the storm, hastily securing the precious tablet in a padded pack on Harding's back. Our plan was to fall back to the last camp, where a sturdier shelter and additional supplies awaited, only a few miles away across the glacier. The trek back was a waking nightmare. The flat expanse that had been easy to navigate hours before was now an alien landscape of whirling white. A ferocious blizzard engulfed us, reducing visibility to a few feet. We roped ourselves together to avoid becoming separated in the featureless void. The wind came in howling gusts that threatened to knock us off our feet, and the temperature plummeted with each passing minute. I was half blind, ice coating my goggles, but I sensed an uncanny quality to this storm, as if it were more than a clash of air masses, as if some malevolent will drove it. The very ice beneath us groaned and cracked at times, making it clear that to stop was to die. I remember shouting to keep moving, though the words whipped away unheard. Above the roar of the elements, I fancied I heard a different sound, a deep, rhythmic vibration, almost below the threshold of hearing, that pulsed in the air and in my chest. It reminded me eerily of the humming interference on our radio earlier, now magnified and woven into the wind itself. Marina suddenly cried out and pointed behind us, her voice thin against the storm. I glanced back, straining to see through the swirling snow. A strange light glimmered in the distance behind us, near where the ruins lay buried. At first I thought it might be the glow of the distant aurora again, but this was different, concentrated, purposeful. The lights, a ghastly bluish-green, swirled and coalesced, rising up like a vortex or column within the blizzard. With dawning horror, I realized the storm clouds above were glowing, illuminated from below by this uncanny radiance. For one insane moment I hoped it was an illusion of refracted moonlight or St. Elmo's fire, but as the luminescence gathered form, that hope died. The swirling glow took on the outline of something immense and indescribable, a towering silhouette in the heart of the maelstrom, vaguely humanoid, yet shifting and unstable, as if the very storm was given conscious shape. Pale ribbons of light extended from its core, like tentacular arms, whipping and stretching through the sky. Victor saw it too and began to scream, a high, keening wail of mindless terror that cut through the air. "It's coming!" he shrieked, his voice breaking. In that moment, all pretense of rationality left us. Panic seized our group as firmly as the cold. We ran. We ran as if all the devils of hell were at our heels, the rope that bound us together now a lifeline keeping us from scattering like the leaves in the gale. Snow stung my face and the ground swayed beneath my stumbling feet. I heard Marina sobbing prayers, and I realized with horror that the rope had gone slack on one end. Dr. Sakharov, who had been last in line, was no longer attached. I caught a glimpse of him standing motionless some 30 yards behind, outlined against the phosphorescent haze. He had unfastened his harness and stood transfixed, head tilted back as if in a trance, gazing up at the towering apparition bearing down on him. I cried out his name and instinctively tried to rush back to him, but Miles yanked me forward with a painful jerk. "He's gone!" the captain roared, his voice nearly drowned by the wind. I could only watch in helpless anguish as the glowing column of stormlight enveloped Victor. One of those extensions of light lashed downward with impossible speed, striking him. There was a flash of sickly green and a thunderous crack that I could feel in my teeth. When the snow eddies cleared a moment later, Victor was simply gone. Only a burst of dark debris stained the snow where he had stood. Whether it was blood, ash, or something else, I could not tell. No human mind could fully process the insane reality of what we had witnessed. We stumbled onward, half dragged by the relentless miles. Marina's cries had turned to quiet, gasping sobs, and I wondered if her mind was verging on collapse. Dr. Harding pressed on in stoic silence, but I saw a madman in his eyes as he clutched the strapped pack with the tablet as if it were the only thing real. Behind us, the entity moved inexorably, not so much pursuing as hurting us in our flight. Now and then I dared a glance backward. I saw that glow shifting through the swirling snow, at times seemingly dispersing into the storm, only to recongeal closer to us. The wind carried eerie sounds, snatches of an ululating howl and a cacophony of other noises that might have been laughter or the wailing of damned souls. At one point, through a brief gap in the blizzard, I thought I saw smaller shapes capering around the edges of the great luminous column, perhaps the very creatures we'd encountered below, now swarming across the ice in the wake of their master. My senses threatened to buckle under the weight of that nightmare. At long last, half dead with cold and terror, we reached the site of our last camp, a blessed memory of human endeavor in the midst of this chaos. The sled and supplies we left were covered in drifted snow, but the tall poles of our canvas storage tent still stood, a silhouette against the gray void. By some fortune, the tent had not blown away. We tumbled inside, hauling the semi-conscious Marina with us, and hastily fastened the flap. In that tenuous shelter, with canvas walls shuddering around us, we 4 survivors stared at one another in shock. Our frosted faces, drawn and hollow-eyed, must have each reflected the same disbelief and dawning madness. Miles fumbled with the radio transmitter, his hands shaking violently from the cold and dread. Static greeted us, but then, miraculously, a burst of a clear signal cut through. The storm's interference had lessened, or the device had simply decided to grant us this mercy. He began to broadcast a distress call, shouting our coordinates and situation into the microphone, repeating our plea for immediate evacuation. I could not tell if anyone heard us, but the act of calling out gave us a glimmer of hope. While Miles wrestled with the radio, I turned to Dr. Harding, who sat hunched and rocking slightly, hugging the pack with the stone tablet to his chest. I gently touched his shoulder, and he looked at me with eyes that struggled to focus. He was murmuring to himself. As I leaned in, I caught fragments of what he was saying, and a chill deeper than the polar cold ran through me. He was reciting parts of the tablet's translation, broken phrases we had heard earlier. "The sleeper in the ice, the devourer of stars," he mumbled, lips bluish and trembling. "Bound by the 5 seals, under the sky, burns green. We broke it. We broke the first seal." His voice hitched on a sob or a laugh. I could not tell which. "We broke it. And now. Before I could attempt to arouse him from this stupor, a tremendous impact shook the earth. The ground bucked, knocking us against the metal frame of the tent. A sound followed that I will never forget. A multi-layered roar, as if 1,000 icebergs were cracking and collapsing at once, underlain by a monstrous, droning bellow that resonated in our bones. The sleeper, the thing we had awakened, was wrathful, and the very land responded to its fury. Miles dropped the radio and shouted, "We have to signal them now, if they're coming!" Through a gap torn in the tent's fabric, I saw an eerie green glow intensify outside. The captain grabbed a flare gun from our emergency kit. Despite our protests, he staggered out into the howling storm to fire a last desperate signal into the heavens. Marina and I crouched by the rent in the tent, peering out into the chaos. We saw Miles as a dim figure bracing himself against the wind. He fired a flare. A brilliant crimson arc cut through the sky, illuminating the swirling snow with hellish red light. For a few heartbeats, the blizzard thinned and we saw it, truly saw it, in all its blasphemous glory. It loomed above the camp not 100 yards away, a towering column of darkness and light given form. In the blood-red illumination of the flare, the entity's shape was drawn into stark relief. It was vaguely humanoid, but stretched and distorted to colossal proportions, a giant outlined by cracking auroral fire. Its body was composed of swirling storm cloud and radiant vapor, a vaguely translucent mass through which veins of ghostly light pulsed. Two immense arms hung at its sides, tapering into finger-like tendrils that merged with the boiling clouds. Where a head might be, there was a shapeless confluence of shadow and light, and within that murk I saw, or imagined I saw, two burning eyes, the only solid things in that writhing form, huge, lidless orbs of greenish luminescence that cast their malignant gaze upon us. Around the entity's head and shoulders writhed a halo of smaller appendages, or feelers, each one crackling with energy and shifting in and out of corporeality. Its outline seemed to warp the air around it, as if even reality recoiled from its presence. The sight drove a dagger of primal fear into my heart. Marina let out a whimpering moan, and I realized I had stopped breathing. In the next instant, the flare's descent ended, and darkness swept back in like a tide. We lost sight of the monster, but a moment later came a stricken cry from Miles. It was a sound of ultimate agony and despair, cut brutally short. I thought I saw, in the brief flare afterglow, the captain's figure being hurled into the air like a rag doll. Then there was nothing but the raging night and the ever-deepening cold. We were alone with the thing, 3 frail humans against a force beyond comprehension. The tent ripped open fully, and the supporting poles snapped like twigs as an unseen power descended upon us. The last feeble barrier between us and the void was gone. I was flung backward into the snow, the breath knocked from my lungs. I could barely make out Marina's form and the thrashing silhouette of Dr. Harding entangled in canvas. One of the tent poles struck my leg, and I felt a sharp pain. Perhaps it broke, but in that adrenaline-soaked moment, I barely registered it. A colossal shape loomed through the blizzard right above us. My skin prickled and my ears popped as if the air pressure had plummeted, and a nauseating vibration filled the air. Marina was beside me, and I grabbed her hand, both of us cowering as that presence bore down. Dr. Harding's voice rose in a sudden, inhuman shriek of terror somewhere to our right. I turned in time to see him being lifted off the ground, wrapped in what looked like a tendril of pale light. His scream curdled into a ghastly, gargling wail as he and the pack with the tablet were swept upward into the swirling darkness. There was a wet snapping noise, loud even over the storm, and his scream cut off instantly. A shower of red droplets spattered across the snow and on our faces. In that moment, a strange and merciful numbness overtook me, whether from shock, injury, or some unintended pity from the thing in the storm. I found I could move again. With strength I did not know I had, I pulled Marina to her feet. She was sobbing and babbling incoherently, eyes unfocused. The nightmarish figure of the cosmic horror was shifting, perhaps distracted with the gruesome remains of Harding. I seized the opportunity. Half dragging, half carrying Marina, I bolted away from that ruined camp into the darkness, moving purely on desperation and instinct. The wind was at our backs now, almost propelling us forward as we limped and staggered over the ice and snow. Behind us rose a cacophony of sounds, roars, crackling energy, and a screech that might have been the frustration of a thwarted predator. I expected each second to feel a burning grasp on my shoulders, or a bolt of impossible force through my back, but we kept running, stumbling, crawling when we fell, then getting up again. I recall glimpses of that mad flight, the world reduced to an endless expanse of night and snow, with the monstrous glow slowly receding behind us. Time lost meaning. It seemed we fled for hours, though it could not have been more than a few minutes. Once I dared to look over my shoulder and saw the entity, now a distant pillar of light and shadow amid the gale, seemingly halted. Perhaps it was bound to the vicinity of its city and could not roam further, or perhaps it simply chose not to give chase beyond a certain point. Its glowing eyes, or were they stars in the sky, my memory falters, burned through the darkness one last time, then faded as the howling wind carried us far, far away. At some point, exhaustion and cold took their toll, and my mind mercifully blacked out. Marina and I were found 2 days later by a search and rescue team, nearly 50 miles from the dig site. Against all odds, we had survived and wandered far enough to intercept a survey plane's path. We were huddled behind an outcrop of ice, half buried in snow. I was still clinging to Marina, having wrapped both of us in a torn piece of canvas for warmth. The rescuers said I was raving and delirious. Apparently, I kept insisting that they turn off the lights and stop the whispering, though there were no such things to be heard or seen. They airlifted us to the main Antarctic base, where we slowly recovered from frostbite and shock. Marina remained unconscious for most of the rescue and her subsequent fevered delirium, but I was awake enough to learn that our emergency radio call had been picked up. Captain Miles' flare had also been spotted faintly in the distance by a satellite, which helped them triangulate our location in that endless white. Of Dr. Harding, Captain Miles, and Dr. Sakharov, no trace was ever found. The official report lists them as victims of a catastrophic storm and a crevasse accident. A search of the area after the weather calmed revealed a massive ice collapse where our camp had been, consistent with an avalanche or glacial quake. All that remained was a jumbled field of ice boulders and snow. Of our equipment, only a few twisted metal tools and fragments of the tents were recovered. The rescuers noted odd readings on their instruments, minor magnetic fluctuations, and radio interference, but these were attributed to the aftermath of the storm. Our accounts of what truly happened were met with sympathetic nods and assurances that hallucinations are common in extreme conditions. In the end, even I found it easier to nod in weak agreement than to press the issue. How could we ever make them believe? Back in the warmth and safety of civilization, the events on the ice might have begun to feel unreal, like a distant nightmare, except that I cannot escape the truth of what I experienced. Every night, sleep brings me back to that accursed city beneath the ice, and the horror we unwittingly unleashed. I see again the titanic shadow swirling in the freezing sky, and I hear the echo of that alien shriek. I see Victor's face frozen in terror, Harding's final, awful ascent into the darkness, and Miles' final stand with flare in hand. These images do not fade with time. If anything, they grow more vivid, etched by a mind that cannot forget. I have in my possession the one piece of physical evidence of our ordeal, the stone tablet that Dr. Harding so zealously preserved, the same that we suspect played a role in breaking the creature's seal. Unbeknownst to the rescue team, I recovered it from the snow before we were found. It now lies wrapped in cloth in an old sea chest in my study, alongside Harding's tattered notebook. On quiet nights, I fancy I can hear a faint vibration or humming emanating from that chest, as though the relic still resonates with the power that once held the sleeper imprisoned. I have not dared show it to any expert or authority, for fear of what attention it might draw or what further harm it might cause. Instead, I have taken it upon myself to continue deciphering its dread message using Harding's notes and every resource I can secretly gather. Perhaps it is an act of penance or obsession, or the last shred of hope I cling to, that I might find some way to undo what we have done. What little I have managed to translate chills me more than the memories of that night. The tablet's writings speak of an entity not born of Earth, a conqueror from the stars who fell to our world in ancient times. The denizens of the polar city, whether they were an early offshoot of humanity or an entirely non-human race, worshipped this being as a god even as it threatened to destroy them. They called it by titles that translate roughly to Eater of Light and the Sleeper in the Ice. It took a great revolt or ritual, my understanding is unclear which, to finally imprison the being. They bound it beneath the ice with spells or technologies indistinguishable from magic, locking it away with a series of seals. The tablet itself appears to be one such seal, a final lock meant to ensure the thing would never break free. Their warnings were explicit, that any who disturbed this prison risk unleashing a doom beyond all reckoning. We, in our ignorance, ignored those ancient warnings. We pierced the seal when we removed the tablet and shattered the sanctity of that place. I fear that what we experienced was only the beginning, the first stirring of a monster that has yet to fully awaken. The text suggests that only one seal was broken that day. Others may still remain intact deeper in the catacombs, or perhaps at other sites around the globe. Unless those remaining bonds hold, it is only a matter of time before the sleeper fully rises. Whether it requires certain celestial alignments, or the lifeblood of more intruders? I cannot say, but the prospect fills me with unspeakable dread. Should that horror emerge unimpeded into our world, I have no doubt it would mean the end of human civilization, if not the end of humanity itself. How could we stand against a being that turns storm winds and auroras into its servants, that moves through the sky as easily as a fish through water? We would be as ants before a god of wrath and madness. I finish this account with a heavy heart and a soul burdened by guilt. What answer can I give to the families of my lost friends? That they died unleashing a nightmare upon the world? In our pursuit of knowledge, we have pried open a door that was sealed for eons, and some doors are meant to remain forever closed. I can only hope this record serves as a warning to those who might follow in our footsteps. As I pen these final lines, I find my eyes drawn to the window. A winter storm is raging outside, and the wind's howl becomes to my ears that awful, familiar drone. My nerves are frayed. Every creak of the house startles me, and the shadows cast by my lamp seem to writhe in the corner of my vision. Perhaps I will never rid myself of that feeling of watchful dread. Still, I must try to live on, if only to spread the warning. I intend to send copies of this manuscript to trusted colleagues, with certain details obscured, so they do not think me completely mad, and even to authorities, though I doubt any action will be taken until it is too late. Would I even be believed? Perhaps not. Perhaps it is better if this horror dies with me, and yet I know it lives on beneath the ice, in that eternal night, waiting. May God forgive us our folly in those remote, unhallowed depths, and if you who read this ever find yourself in the lonely, polar darkness, beneath skies that churn with uncanny light, and you hear a whisper on the wind that sounds like a voice calling your name, turn back, and pray that the ancient bonds hold. For some horrors are never meant to be disturbed, and in those desolate places of the world, the unknown can and will devour you, body and soul.